Okay, I think we're going to start. My name's Mark Rudolph. I am the president and CEO of a little consultancy called Justenvironment. A lot of my clients refer to me as a CDO, the Chief Disruption Officer, and I tend to have a lot of fun with a lot of my clients. The topic of today's little panel is called Ramping Up to 100% Renewable Energy. And I think what you're going to hear today from our experts has a lot to do with things that have been done, things that can be done, but most importantly, we're looking at the how of ramping up to 100% renewable, if at all possible. From a formatting point of view, just for everyone's information, I'm going to introduce the speakers, and after that, very short introductions. I hate when people read bios. Then I'm going to give a little table setter on some things that have happened in Canada that I've been involved in on the renewable front. And then we're going to give each of the speakers approximately 10 minutes to chat, give a presentation. Rui has some slides that he's going to be using. And then after that, there should be about 20 minutes or so left over for questions from the floor, so we want to encourage a lot of active participation. So let me give a little background on a story of something I was involved in relating to renewables in Canada. And excuse these stupid glasses. There was a group that was put together called the CARE Coalition. I don't know, has anyone in this room ever heard of the CARE Coalition? One person, brilliant. We flew under the radar. The CARE Coalition stood for the Clean Air Renewable Energy Coalition, and it was a coalition of what we lovingly call counterintuitive strange bedfellows. Strange as this may sound, or some people would think it was strange, but at the time, and this is the year 2000, so it's 16 years ago, it was co-founded by Suncor Energy, what most people assume to be a bitumen-oriented oil sands company, and the other co-founder was the Pembina Institute. And we had approximately 15, 16 corporate members from Dofasco and Dow and Suncor and Shell and Enbridge to little companies. Cloudworks was a run-of-river hydro company here in Vancouver. And then we had a mix of environment groups from Pembina to WWF, Friends of the Earth, Pollution Probe, I don't remember them all. And I was the executive director of the organization in addition to having other clients. It was very interesting, herding 23 kittens every month. But we did a very good job of checking our biases at the door, working together with a single vision, which was to try to increase the deployment of renewable power in Canada. And at the end of the day, frankly, get shit done. We worked together for 10 years, although most of the work from a money perspective happened in the first 6, 7 years. And basically what we were trying to do was to get some support money, it's a quiet way of saying subsidies, to the industry to kickstart the renewable industry in Canada. At the end of the day, we got $1.8 billion through the federal government, unbeknownst to most people in Canada. And that's why lots of things have changed on the renewables front. When we started the coalition in 2000, the country had 102 megawatts of wind power. Today, that's where I gotta get the glasses. Today, the country has 10,204 megawatts of wind power. And this was not just us. You know, Canadian Wind Association, COSIA, Canadian Solar Industries Association, other things. There are lots of people that helped out the whole effort, but we did a major lobby campaign to the federal government for dollars. When we started, there were 0 solar PV megawatts. Today, there are 2,650 megawatts of solar PV. And indeed, over the period from 2009 to 2015, the price of wind power has gone down 61%, and the price of solar power has gone down 82%. So, that sort of helped set the stage for things that have gone on in Canada. In my opinion, we haven't gone as far as we could, but the question becomes, can you go to 100% renewables? And if people were here yesterday, You heard the Vancouver Mayor, Gregor Robson, talk about the fact that the city was moving to or is moving to 100% renewables. There are a lot of other cities that are attempting to do so. And similarly, there's activity that's happening on a number of other fronts. For instance, people may know of a group called RE100, RE100, Renewable Energy 100. I guess it came out of COP, I think. But basically, it's a collaborative of major companies who have committed to moving to 100% renewable electricity. I don't know what the time frame is exactly, but they're little companies that most of you won't know about. IKEA, Swiss Re, Adobe, Coca-Cola, Google, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Nestle, Nike, Philips, P&G, Starbucks, Tata Motors out of India, Unilever, and Walmart. So indeed, there is activity going on. We have 3 experts that cover sort of 3 different domains. To my immediately left is Pernille Overbye. She's the Managing Director of Energy Services Division North America of Ramboll, Inc., but she's originally from Denmark and has many stories to tell us all about the experience in Copenhagen. Chousal is the Innovation Director at EDP Renewables from Spain. Rui works out of Portugal, and they have operations all over the world. And last but not least is our banker, Stuart Staley from Citi. He's the Managing Director, Global Head of Commodities for Citi Bank, technically. I thought he was in New York, but he's from London. And they're going to give all of us some information and their overview on moving towards 100% renewables. And we're going to start with Pernille. Pernille.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm probably more here as a capacity of being Danish. And I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of being the ambassador here. Denmark is, as you may know, a small country. We haven't got any large manufacturing. We're probably best known for Hans Christian Andersen and The Little Mermaid. But we are also getting quite known for our achievements within energy efficiency. And this is, of course, what I'd like to talk about today. Denmark is actually one of the most energy efficient countries in the world. And we have achieved this through very strong focus on district heating and cogeneration, or combined heat and power. And this has been a key enabler for us to achieve energy efficiency, reducing of carbon emissions, and decoupling this for economic growth. And I think that's a very important aspect. We are actually getting many visitors, not just normal tourists to see The Little Mermaid, but also visitors to see what we've done, to see our district energy network, to visit our power stations. And myself and colleagues are giving many presentations, and the same result comes out that the visitors like to do what we've done. But they don't necessarily, they won't necessarily be able to do it the same way that we've done it. But with the focus on decarbonization and using renewable energy, reducing fossil fuels, I think there's a lot of countries that are in a hurry. And I think it's important to stress that the way Denmark has achieved what we have achieved today, we actually started planning for this over 100 years ago, where we first time utilized waste as a fuel source and burned that in a controlled manner and used the heat in a nearby hospital in the city center of Copenhagen at the time. But for sure, in the 70s and 80s, there was a very strong strategic focus and planning for becoming independent of importing oil from the Middle East was the first target. So we've done, back in the late 70s, Denmark implemented a heat law, recognizing that thermal energy was a commodity equally to electricity, natural gas. And we planned throughout the communities what technology was best served on a socio-economic evaluation, so what's best for the country as a whole and not for the individual company. We decided in the early 80s that you can't have a power plant without being cogeneration, so all our power stations utilized the heat. And actually to the extent that you could say where most people, when they talk about energy, they think of electricity and power. In Denmark, when we talk about energy, we think about heating first, and then comes the electricity. And it's actually this thermal grid that we have established with over 60% of the buildings in Denmark being supplied or heated from district heating. We can focus much more on an interaction of the electricity into this thermal grid. This, of course, requires an infrastructure, no doubt about that, and investment. And just equally to a power grid and a natural gas piped infrastructure, a thermal heating infrastructure needs an investment. And this is done, we believe, with the responsibility at government level. This is not necessarily something that the private market should be driven. And, but once it is in place, it offers tremendous opportunity for introducing renewables into this energy mix and this energy infrastructure. So the question is, how can other people do this? And as I said earlier, I appreciate that not everybody can do what we've done in Denmark, which has been through planning and also something that is not that popular, energy taxes. We have very high taxes in Denmark. Believe it or not, we are also still a very happy country. We were actually voted a few years ago the most happiest people in the world, despite having a HST factor of 25%, and on top of that we have energy taxes. So anyway, but it's taxes and planning, I think, is some very key tools in being able to achieve something similar to what Denmark has. And because of the reason of it being a long-term investment, as I mentioned, local government and local authorities have a very strong role. I think there's still opportunities that can be left for the market, for the private sector, but I think they need to be sort of gently nurtured, pushed in the right direction. I'd just like to then finish, because Denmark has achieved a lot already, but we still have a lot of strong goals for going forward. And the district heating infrastructure is a key tool here again. We are, of course, in the EU, or we are part of Europe anyway, and for 2020, the EU have set some very strong political energy policy goals for CO2 reductions, and Denmark does, even though we're a small country, play a very important role in this. But as a nation, we've also put a target of having 50% of the domestic electricity being met by wind power, and also that towards 2050, our energy system will be independent of fossil fuels. And I'm sorry to have to repeat myself, but I do believe that the district heating network, that to have this thermal grid is a key enabler to achieve this. And this is done by being able to balance the wind energy in the power grid using this thermal grid, and also having heat storage. We use actually electrical boilers, which are cheap and efficient to cheap to install and efficient to run, but we use it to use the renewable energy from the winds and to feed the thermal energy into the district heating infrastructure. And also we are able to operate our power stations in either electrical or heat-only mode, so that if there is a lot of wind, we only generate heat from the power stations. If the heat is not required at that time, we can store it, and we use both short-term thermal storage or seasonal storage, that we also use to capture solar thermal energy. So we capture the energy from the sun in the summertime, and we can divert the production to use it in the autumn and winter time through these seasonal storage. And some communities in Denmark has actually 50 to 60% of the base load comes from the sun, so 100% renewable at those times. I think the Danish experience is something that can be copied to many countries, and happy to help, of course. You're very welcome to visit us, and I hope that that we can get a good discussion going with this introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Rui?
Okay. Good.
Go ahead.
It's one. Doesn't work. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to participate in this conference. Okay, it's okay.
It's going?
And to share the vision of share with you the vision of the renewable energy sector on climate change, on the how the renewables electricity sector can commit with a credible solution to decarbonize the energy system. I have some slides about this topic, and I will show them quickly. As everybody told during the sessions here in the conference, the climate change is an immense challenge to the humanity, and it will stay for a long time. In face of that, both mitigation and adaptation will be needed. It's a very strong sentence. Manage the unavoidable, avoid the unmanageable. A radical transformation of the energy systems is ongoing, is accelerating, but energy demand is still growing, namely in Asia, and the energy systems transitions don't happen overnight, and it's a big challenge. In this landscape, renewable energy and energy efficiency will be going to be major components of the future energy system. I will be more focused on the renewable electricity sector because it's where I come from. What are the main growth drivers for this renewable electricity sector? It's for sure the climate change agenda, the targets of the Paris summit last December, to have a temperature limit well below 2 degrees and 450 parts per million of concentration of greenhouse gases. And as an aspirational target, 1.5 degrees. We have the famous intended national determined contributions made by previous to the summit. We have also the very strong European Union 2030 targets, and also the clean power plant in the US after the production tax credits that are ongoing now, that are making a big growth in renewables in the US. by other hand, there is a consensus that the competitiveness of renewables is a fact, and even if the climate change was not a big, huge problem, it's sure that investors will bet in renewables, because renewables are now namely wind onshore, that is the cheapest renewable energy in pair with coal and gas. And also, solar PV is becoming increasingly competitive in several regions of the world. And by hand, offshore wind is also maturing, and will become an option in the medium term. As everybody knows, the use of energy represents by far the largest source of emissions, and where the electricity represents a great part of the whole CO2 emissions. And to reduce these emissions, it's necessary to take urgent and significant action in the electricity sector, because to displace fossil fuels in industry and transport, it's more expensive and it's more difficult, and it takes longer than in the electricity sector. In order to decarbonize the electricity sector, renewables are essential, and as it's proved by the submitted NDCs. In the next let's talk about the next 25 years until 2040. The global renewable electricity generation will represent around 50% of the new generation. Wind and solar are going to represent the largest share, 43% of the net additions, and around 2 terawatts of wind and solar are expected to be installed in this period. It is a very huge task to do this. But the pledges made under the NDCs previous to the Paris Summit won't be enough by themselves to reach the 2 degrees target. The journey is changing, but we are still far from, or not far from, but we have a gap. We need to fill that gap between the NDCs and the target, the 2 degrees target. And for that, you need to fill that gap. You need stronger and coordinated and rapid action. And for sure, you need renewable electricity. For that, to fill that gap, there will be needed short and long-term actions to transform the energy system as a whole, to comply with the 2 degree scenarios. But in the short term, the levers will be increased energy efficiency in transportation, in the industry, in the buildings. Also to limit less efficient coal power and ban the construction of new ones. Reduce the fossil fuel consumption subsidies, and minimize methane release from upstream oil and gas operations, as have been stressed during the previous session, and also to increase the renewable deployment. This represents that current policies and the technologies that are already in a mature stage. But this is not enough. We need long-term transformation, and we need to develop to mature new technologies, bring them to commercial readiness, like to have a wide development of the carbon capture and storage in electricity and industry, to achieve a transition to low-carbon forms of road transport, not only electric vehicles, but advanced fossil fuels, also to increase the nuclear share, and another time to accommodate higher shares of variable renewables. Short-term action relies on wider renewables penetration, as I said. The wind capacity will be rising fourfold and solar PV sixfold until 2030. This will require a lot of investment, additional regulation to ensure reliability of the whole system, and to create conditions to redirect the investment to low carbon technologies, is also to make carbon pricing as a main trend of the transformation of the energy system. Short-term action is not enough to reach the 2 degrees target. We need further transformational measures. We need to accommodate higher shares of renewables, up to 20% of global electricity generation from 3% in 2 years ago. It will be necessary to install at least 4.5 terawatts of renewables until 2040, namely through significant wind and solar developments. This is a huge amount of capacity, but for instance, Bloomberg New Energy Finance forecasts are even more optimistic than this EAA scenario, central scenario. But fortunately, there is an economical rationale, especially for wind. Wind and solar competitiveness is even expected to grow over time. Wind onshore is the most competitive source of energy for now. Solar PV is becoming increasingly competitive, and it is expected to beat wind in the long term and then selected in sunnier regions. And offshore wind is expected to achieve important cost reduction, but is still far from onshore due to the natural intrinsic conditions where it will be developed. Talking a little bit about offshore, that is not so developed in the North America. It's more and will remain until 2030. It's expected the forecast is to remain a very Eurocentric industry until there. It's still a very policy-driven business. It needs because there is too capex intensive, and it needs the costs must be driven down by economies of scales, by innovation, the supply chain maturation, and also by higher capacity turbines. Turbines higher than 6 to 10 megawatts, and even more in the future. The most capital-intensive areas of offshore are turbines, foundations, and installation. And there is in three areas mainly where the European innovation is R&D, and innovation is focused. EDP is involved in some innovation projects in foundations and installation area. And the offshore wind, as is developing, has moved further from shore into deep waters, and with increased average turbine capacity, that brings new big challenge to the industry. Renewable electricity is competitive. It's feasible to achieve those levels of penetration in the system, but these high levels of integration in the electricity systems will be very challenging, because there will be needed additional service to absorb the variability and to ensure stability and to meet peak demand. We'll need the enhanced operation of the systems and markets and flexible capacity technologies to back up intermittency. I think flexible capacity is a range of various technology options, including demand-side management, including natural gas, high-efficiency natural gas power plants, battery storage, from grid scale to consumer scale to electrical vehicles, battery storage. We'll need also great cross-border interconnection, smart grids, virtual power plants, and among others. And now the economics. I have a slide from my colleagues from Citi that shows that the achievement of the 2 degrees target will require large amounts of investments, but if we focus only on the energy sector, we conclude that the sums of money to be spent in the next 25 years are estimated to be similar in a business as usual scenario or in an action scenario to tackle climate change. Focus on the electricity sector, the low carbon scenario is even less costly than the business as usual scenario. Saying that there are some final key takeaways. We can summarize that current commitments are not enough to achieve the 2 degrees target. Until in the next 25 years, it will be necessary to install at least 4.5 terawatts of variable renewables. Given the stats of the ongoing long-term action levels that I have talked previously, the need of variable renewables may be even higher. This seems economical and technical, realistic and feasible, given the competitiveness and the enhanced technicalities of the variable renewables. Large scale of deployment of wind onshore and solar PV with policy support and technologies advances, innovation, steep learning curves. For instance, the learning curve of solar is now around 20%, and the wind learning rate is around 15%. This has resulted in consistent cost of energy declines. We can say that wind and solar are mainstream and mature technologies. They have the potential to grow to very large scale and play an important role in the decarbonization of the whole energy system. To finalize, only a few words about my company. My company has started in Portugal 10 years, more or less 10 years ago, with a small wind capacity, and now we have become we are ranking 4 on the world mainly on onshore energy. We are a market leader in a sustainable and competitive business. We are first in Portugal, Poland, and we are third in the West and in Spain. And we have small amounts of solar PV now, but we intend to grow in the future. We are developing commercial big offshore projects in the UK and in France. And we have innovation projects in Portugal for in the foundations and installation techniques or new techniques for the future. Also, say a final word about EDP Group, that is the parent holding company of EDP Renewables, that holds around 80% of the shares of EDP Renewables. And in the way to the Paris summit, we announced a commitment, EDP Group announced a commitment of having to ramp up to more than 75% of renewables on their portfolio, meaning that around 20 gigawatts of wind and hydro. And that's all.
Very good. Rui, thank you very much. Stuart?
Thank you, Mark. So why is a guy from a bank sitting on this panel is probably a question going through a few of your minds. I actually come from a family of academics, so I can assure you every time I'm home over the holidays, they look at me shaking their heads, wondering where it all went so wrong. But Citi in particular, we are one of the largest participants in these markets, financing these developments. As Rui mentioned, this is a very capital-intensive industry, and as intermediaries in this space, we are matching up people who are looking to invest in opportunities with people who are looking to use that capital to deploy it in projects. And the electric power industry is among the most capital-intensive industries out there, and it mandates that sort of intermediary role to create the financing for that. Now, a lot of what we do is really about trying to de-risk or eliminate risks from these projects. In fact, the part of the banking business that I'm from is actually the commodity business. And our role in all of this is to try to eliminate many of the risks to attract a larger realm of capital out there that is interested in investing in these opportunities. As a firm, Citi has a long history really playing a major role in a lot of elements of policy around sustainable development. We were one of the original participants in the Equator Principles, defining, amongst other things, what sort of attributes would be necessary for projects that we would finance in developing markets, and conversely, which ones we would not. We have had a commitment to sustainability in our own actions. We set a goal of investing $50 billion in sustainable endeavors in 2005. I think we achieved that goal 2 or 3 years early. We are now have come out with the second iteration of that goal, Part 2, which is an effort to mobilize $100 billion. And we're 2 or 3 years into that, and well ahead of scale, or ahead of target at this point. So as really the realm in which we operate is in the competitive market, which I think about as helping to efficiently make decisions about which projects get developed, how they get financed, and ultimately how they're operated. But certainly, as I think was evident from the comments that Pernille started with, there is a heavy element of government control and a policy framework, which is absolutely essential for this. My initial foray into the electric power industry was really I was quite involved in a project with the state of New York, where New York was attempting to capture the externalities or the non-market costs associated with different choices about what type of generation they might build. And when I think about how these markets function, it's really within a policy framework. And I think for those of you who saw the previous panel, that was a particularly prevalent point made in that panel, that really how that policy framework is designed is still incredibly crucial to the growth in this space. And in fact, when we look at the renewable growth, for example, in the U.S., we have been among the most active financing wind farm developments in the United States. A huge component of that is still driven by the production tax credit. What we're seeing over time is that these policy choices are evolving. At the same time, it's driving investment in technologies, and there are very impressive innovation curves, as Rui was just citing, with respect to both solar and wind, and that ingenuity that we see, across all markets is really coming to bear in this space. As a firm involved in financing and arranging these long-lived projects, we view our role as, we would term it as enabling progress, but we also feel that we have an obligation to make sure that progress is sustainable. We attempt to embody those values in our own actions. We are in the process of redoing our headquarters building in New York, trying for LEED Platinum certification. And what we find is that there are many other corporate clients out there now who are seeking to reflect their value structure in the decisions they make in the market. And that is a significant component of our business. There was a transaction that we did in the middle of last year that received a lot of attention, where we were financing the development of a wind farm with Starwood Capital on one hand in North Texas, and we're also selling a good proportion of the output from that facility to Facebook. And Facebook was in the process of developing a data center to support their business outside of Fort Worth, and they had made a decision as a firm that they wanted their choice of how they empowered that data center to reflect their corporate values. And we're seeing more and more a lot of corporations who are seeking to do exactly that. That is why intermediaries in this space, such as Citi, exist, because oftentimes the demands and the needs for a project developer are very different from the wants and the needs of an ultimate consumer. And just in the same way that we intermediate investment flows, where we have, on one hand, people depositing money, on the other hand, people looking for capital to invest in new projects, and we're balancing that on a large portfolio basis. I think about what we do in the energy space, and this is particularly relevant to these renewable projects. We're doing very much the same thing. So the way that a wind project wants to sell its output is not at all similar to the way that an end user, such as a data center or a big corporate consumer, a Walmart or a Costco may want to consume that electricity. And that is what's created a role for providers like Citi to step in the middle and to be able to, on the one hand, support, finance, purchase the output from producers in a way that suits the needs of financing those projects, but conversely, on the other hand, turn around and optimize that and sell it to those who want to consume that power, sell it to them in the way that suits their business. So it's very much the role we play in this. We do a lot of business with EDP as just another market participant all over the world. I think that what you'll find is that there are big companies behind most of this. It's a very capital-intensive industry. I think there's a notion sometimes amongst the corporate clients with whom we deal that these are very nice mom-and-pop operations where it may be just a farmer in West Texas who's looking to set up a wind farm. But these are the largest capital providers, capital managers, investment managers in the world that are very active in that space. And I would say that's a very positive sign, because we've set the policy framework up in a way that is driving that sort of activity from investors to providers. So with that, Mark, I'll hand it back to you. And
thank you very much. I think you've seen all of the three panelists give us quite different perspectives on the topic that we wanted to chat about. But we have some time now, and I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask questions. Do we have any mics around, or those boxes, or whatever they use? I want to make sure people can hear the questions. Can you ask loudly, or I'll repeat it for you?
At COP15 in Copenhagen, at COP15, the EU undertook a greater commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 20% or 25% below 1990.
Mm-hmm.
In COP15 in Copenhagen, the EU undertook a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 20 to 25% below 1990 levels, even going as far as 30% if other states would follow, by the year 2020. In COP21, it's all over the place. It ranges from 19...
And your question
My
is?
My question is, well, I just wanted to explain.
I understand.
Just take a second. All over the place, from 1990 up to 2010, percentages are all over the place. Are you not in a perfect position to lobby internationally to get the states to stick to a common baseline like 1990 and a common dateline and make it a commitment?
I'm going to say we aren't going to answer that question because it really doesn't have a lot to do with ramping up to 100% renewables. It's a very good point from a policy perspective. It's a very good point from a policy perspective. I think there are some people here who can answer that question for you of a political nature that you may be seeing later today after the First Minister's meeting at 5:30 in this room. It'll be a perfect question to ask the 4 premiers in the room who will be there. So, next question. Right here, sorry.
No, sorry, but my voice is a bit gone, but that's okay. You can hear me now. I have a question regarding the old stories I hear is like, oh, it takes so much time, it's so much a big effort, this whole transition. Whereas I'm hearing only opportunities. So my question is, what is the big weight around the energy transition? Because it's business opportunity, that new chances are emerging. What is the big fuss?
Can I ask Stuart to answer that from a financial perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, really. Obviously, there are many different regulatory regimes, even within countries. The U.S. is a bit of a balkanized mess in and of itself. But I would say, what is one thing that is delaying things is that there is still regulatory uncertainty in the future, and that a lot of these programs, we're talking about assets that have lives of 20 to 30 years, and sometimes it can take a while to get all the permits and everything in place to develop these things. It might take 4 or 5 years, and the rules can change in the span of an administration. And I think that's one thing that stands in the way. What else? I think there's that the market has to over time develop the comfort level with these things, with these projects, so that what we see is that things pick up pace as you get success stories. Like anything, I think it's, there's nothing that takes away risk like experience and paying tuition through making errors. And so some of it, I would say, is somewhat natural. And also it's picking up pace because of the learning curves that Rui referred to. As we get money devoted to these sectors, we are able to put that learning to work, and the returns from these projects can become more compelling as the technology evolves. I think I always comment that in this sort of evolution, I'm constantly looking for any substitute into the equation for time, but I haven't yet found one. Some of it is just a requirement for the way that systems and markets and processes evolve.
There's a question over there.
Hi. Yeah, Dave Punch, Sky Energy Capital. We finance energy efficiency retrofits and distributed generation projects at the commercial and industrial level. Question is primarily directed to Stuart. In regards to energy efficiency finance, there's been some innovative models on energy savings agreements and energy savings performance agreements. However, they're often difficult to finance from a lender's perspective, and much like most projects, it does require some leverage and a component of debt. I think Citi's had some experience and been a pioneer in that. I'm not sure how well that initial portfolio went. I think they kind of backed away from doing some of those on a larger scale, and maybe you could speak to that. And also, I think that speaks to a little bit of a question of how do you deploy this a lot faster, whether it's LED lighting or HVAC or building controls. There's a lot of old building stock, and we also know there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and just wasted cost and utility bills going out the door every month. So how do we accelerate that and look at platforms or policy to really make that happen?
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to the example you cite, but I think you're right, not just with respect to Citi, but others, that there has been mixed success with trying to securitize those efficiency gains and find markets to sell those securities into. Again, a difficult one. Some of it kind of relates to the previous question in terms of paying tuition, making mistakes, learning from that experience, and figuring out how to evolve those structures so that they appeal to different sets of investors. But those smaller scale shared savings type things are not as natural a fit with the market structure that we have set up on a wholesale level across all countries, which is why I think you have seen the initial growth and much more capital flowing towards opportunities where on a wholesale level, generation capacity is being built, and people are able to finance the output rather than, in essence, financing the savings. And I don't have a huge amount of experience in that area, so I'm not trying to duck your question. I'm trying to respect the boundaries of my own knowledge, but I think that those types of opportunities will continue to evolve, and we haven't found the killer app yet, if you will, where that has caught fire. And that's not unique to those types of opportunities. I think what we found with a lot of things over time is that we fumble around trying to find what is going to work, what is going to appeal, try to learn those lessons. And
is there possibly a role for government, much like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac has a market for mortgages as a buyer of mortgages that are standardized? Could there be standardizations and they're the aggregator that ends up owning this portfolio of diversified assets? Because diversification seems to be, and cross-collateralization seems to be the key.
yeah, I mean, that really takes away a lot of the risks. I think standardization is a key in those types of areas because you're really dealing with a bit of a dog's breakfast in terms of what's there. Also, you reference some of the government mortgage agencies, putting federal guarantees behind some of these things could also de-risk them and attract different pools of capital to those types of opportunities. So I certainly think that the initial breakthroughs are going to happen as a function of evolving that policy framework, and those types of things that you're citing are probably two good examples of how that will ultimately happen.
We've got time for about 2 more questions. The lady in the front here. That would be you. Oh, is there a box?
Hi. I have a question for Pernille. I work in healthcare in British Columbia, and so I had a little chuckle when you said about 100 years ago, your hospital started district energy, and that really makes great sense. And we, the various healthcare provider or people in British Columbia have talked about this with government. We need energy, we need high thermal energy. We're a great place to have district energy. Usually there's a high population around us. Getting that pipe between the other users and the healthcare, it's just so complicated. And I'm just wondering, what did they do in Denmark to actually facilitate that? So what policies were brought in? What mechanisms were brought in to help facilitate that?
Yeah. Well, as mentioned, the Danish government put in place a heat law, which stipulates and put onto the local authorities to plan for their energy. So they mapped where are the energy consumers, where are the energy producers, and then they linked them up. So in that way, they could say, well, this area actually lends itself best for district heating. This area here is better for natural gas infrastructure and so forth. So, this was revisited again after 20 years or so. So we're now in a new process of, because we have an established infrastructure, it now moves into the natural gas areas because of the taxation as well, that and the government wanting to reduce or get rid of using the fossil fuels, and basically. So, but I would say it's a question of mapping the opportunities that are in your surrounding area, and you can actually, we do it every day. We fit these pipes in between the other services. Sometimes you might have to move the other services a bit, because usually the district energy pipes are a lot bigger than the electrical cables or the gas pipes, but it is done. It's done in the city center of Copenhagen to great success. So, and it creates jobs.
The last question, I thought I saw someone over here. This gentleman? Got the box?
Oh, there's one with the box there at the back.
Oh,
Can you switch microphones? Can you give them the one that works?
Thank you. Oops. My question is, how much are electric cars required to provide stability and storage for a power grid as it approaches 70, 80, 90% renewable energy?
who wants to answer that? No?
How much
No? No?
electric cars? No.
They're doing storage in another room later on today, I think. Sorry, we don't have an answer to that question. This gentleman here, and that's the last question we'll have.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk about fossil fuel divestment, and Mark Carney suggested that we should look at considering the risk to stranded assets. I was wondering, from a banker's point of view, Stuart, is it still, does it still make sense to invest in fossil fuels now, or are you starting to look more to renewables?
Yeah, I'm keeping in mind that we're largely mobilizing people's savings towards investments. You know, we're not making that decision in and of ourselves, but you know, the market is still quite willing to finance fossil fuels. You know, I think what you're finding is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to attract financing for coal opportunities in some markets. You're seeing much more interest in natural gas opportunities and renewables. So I think what Mark Carney was referring to is maybe still a few years off, but it is certainly a risk. You know, when we get to these technology transfers or steps in evolution, there is always going to be some element of assets that were built prior to that transition that lose their value and become stranded, as you're referring to. And I think on a small scale, perhaps we're already starting to see the beginning of that trend, but I wouldn't say that, you know, that his comment was really about, you know, sort of the end of that transition. And I think it's certainly become more of a part of conversation. You know, you also see, you know, public interest in that topic coming up in the discussion about endowments divesting from, you know, these types of opportunities. So it's something to watch. There is probably evidence of the beginnings of that trend, but it's certainly not an end game or an absolute, as Governor Carney was sort of forecasting for some time in the future.
Okay, look, thank you very much. Just one quick summary. When we started this little CARE coalition 15 years ago in the year 2000, very interesting companies and NGOs, and we thought in a pragmatic way that getting to 15% renewables by 2020 was a good target. No one ever talked about ramping up to 100% renewables. So there's been a lot of progress that has happened. I hope everyone has enjoyed the panelists today, and on behalf of them all, I think we should all give them a big round of applause. And that's it.